My name is Chamberlain Oxford, and this is my U.S. History Semester 2 project on women's fashion through the decades. Starting off with the 1870s and moving on to the 1890s, 1900s, 1920s, the 1940s, the 1950s, the 60s, the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s. Just by looking at these images, you can see how society influenced how women's fashion was worn. We start off by looking at the fashion trends in the 1870s, just a few years after the end of the Civil War. Women usually would wear bustle-style dresses that were flat in the front but went out further near the rear to express the woman's behind, as you can see in this photo. Corsets were very popular during this time to make the woman appear slimmer in the waist and have a slim princess outline. With this kind of corset, a princess line style was created that had no bustle, but instead would feature long trains and lots of fabric below the hips. Women's dresses began to be seen in more color due to dyes being invented in the 1850s, with many vivid colors with the same color but different shades of it to layer the fabric was a huge trend back in this time. In America, it was still considered ungraceful to have a dress too short or show too much of a woman's ankles or even just their legs. But women would still have their dress at their feet so that the dress would not drag. This would not change into the early 1920s. Next, we move on to the 1890s. Most of this time was known to be the Gibson Girl era. The dresses during this time had extra wide puffy sleeves. Their dresses at the waist had more of an hourglass shape rather than the slim princess outline we had previously seen in the 1870s. The women would wear their hair big above their head with flowers, large hats, and any kind of other accessory that kind of went with their outfits. The skirt of the dress was a lot less voluminous so that women could participate in more activities like riding bikes, horseback, and so much more, but were consisted of the same silhouette as a regular dress would. Sometimes show more of their shoulders and have a fuller skirt with designs such as flowers all over it. They also had more color for the fabrics. Next up, we have the 1900s. The 1900 had a very similar style dress to the 1890s, but as you can see in these photos, they no longer had such puffy sleeves, but now the appeal was to make the chest puff forward, and it would also have a little bit more fabric around the woman's waist. Corsets were still used a lot during this time, especially the health corset that didn't damage the human body as much as the other ones would. These corsets would push the bosom forward and thrust the hips back. The skirt of the dress was tighter around the thighs but then flowed more outward with a thick fabric, and women in this time would still have very large hairstyles on top of their head usually was a large hat. Next up, we have the Roaring Twenties, also just known as the 1920s. After World War I, or the Great War, women wished for a more simple, comfortable style of clothing, and they found that the most popular trend was the flat chest look that all women, no matter the age, took part in. Their skirt had a very loose, straight fit and were now more appropriate in society because the dress was shortened but still sat below the knee. The dress's waistline dropped to the hips. These dresses embraced very long, lean figure and had a lot of vertical lines. Afternoon dresses had more tiers, skirts with flowers or a large bow at the waistline, and a little bit more dressed up. Pastel colors were making a pop in trends too during this time. There was also a lot of beaded and dazzled dresses, who women called flappers would wear out. These women would go to clubs, jazz halls, and illegal speakeasies. These dresses would become very expensive and more extravagant during the later years. Next up, we have the 1940s in women's fashion, and this era was all about the hourglass figure. The dresses were still knee-length with an A-line and puffed shoulders. Pants were also becoming extremely popular during this time, varying from victory suits, wide leg, high-waisted pants. These were usually accessorized with hand purses, gloves. Makeup during this time was very natural, but We had a pop of the red lipstick to show patriotism because there was a lot going on in the US at this time. Evening dresses had spaghetti straps, showed more of a woman's shoulders but only a little bit of cleavage to still stay conservative. The bottom of the dresses were long and elegant with a sleek fabric, and this was around the time of World War II, so high fashion was not really on the minds of the women.